Have you ever heard of parties that started with joy and ended in pure terror? In this video, you will discover the chilling story of a carnival that changed the life of an entire town when Gabriel Torres and his friends crossed paths with the devil himself. What began as a night of celebration turned into a fight for survival, and the consequences were devastating. Have you ever ignored signs that something was wrong until it was too late? This account will make you question the times you avoided listening to your instincts. By watching until the end, you'll understand how an apparently innocent decision can come with a deadly price. Stay until the end to uncover the hidden details and the lessons this story holds. After all, who knows what lurks in the shadows of a simple party? The sun was setting behind the mountains of the small Colombian town, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as the first carnival drums began to beat in the distance. The streets were already decorated with colorful streamers, masks hung on doors, and the smell of festive food filled the air. Children ran from side to side, screaming with joy, and adults, dressed in vibrant costumes, laughed and prepared for the night of celebration. For many, this was the most anticipated event of the year, and the spirit of the party took over the entire town. Gabriel Torres, a respected cattleman from the region, was also looking forward to the celebration. He was a middle-aged man, with a firm posture and an easy smile that quickly attracted attention wherever he went. Along with his longtime friends, he was determined to make this carnival an unforgettable celebration. For years, they had gathered during the event, sharing laughs, stories, and drinks as the party stretched into the early hours. However, that afternoon, something felt different. Although the town was more alive than ever, there was an unsettling feeling in the air. Something Gabriel couldn't clearly identify, but clung to him like an uncomfortable shadow. As he prepared to leave the house, his wife, Maria, watched him from the corner. With a worried expression she tried to hide. "Are you okay?" Gabriel asked, already tying the mask around his face, not noticing the slight tremble in her hands. "Yes. Just be careful, please," she replied, her voice almost inaudible. Gabriel laughed softly, thinking it was just one more of his wife's usual worries. "It's just the carnival, Maria. What could possibly happen?" He gave her a quick kiss on the forehead before leaving, not knowing that these words would bitterly echo in the hours to come. On his way to the town center, Gabriel walked through streets already filling with revelers. His memories of past carnivals were filled with laughter and happy moments, but now, as he crossed the growing crowd, a sense of discomfort washed over him. He tried to shake the feeling, but as he got closer to the meeting point with his friends, he couldn't help but notice how the sky, once illuminated by the sunset hues, now darkened, as if the night arrived faster than usual. When he found his friends, everyone was cheerful, laughing loudly, already with drinks in hand. Among them were Ramiro, a robust man with a contagious laugh, and Fernando, more serious but always ready to have fun. The group seemed unshaken, oblivious to the strange feeling Gabriel carried with him. They greeted Gabriel enthusiastically, and for a few moments he allowed himself to relax, thinking maybe it was just the early festive atmosphere causing his discomfort. "This night will be unforgettable," Ramiro exclaimed, taking a big gulp from his drink. "As always, the best carnival we've ever had." Gabriel smiled, forcing himself to get into the mood, although something still persisted, a feeling he couldn't shake. But how could he have predicted what was really coming? That night, something much darker and more dangerous than just a celebration was at stake. Something that would change his life, and that of his friends forever. As the group began to venture into the decorated, illuminated streets, Gabriel didn't know this would be his last carnival. Despite his friends' enthusiasm and the festive atmosphere spreading through the town, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if the very air was heavier, charged with a strange energy he couldn't explain. Still, he tried to ignore the feeling as he walked through the lively streets, letting himself be enveloped by the colors and sounds of the carnival. However, there was something Gabriel needed to do before fully joining the celebration. Since he was young, he believed in the power of ancient rituals and protective blessings. Even though he was a man of science and reason, he had a bond with these traditions, especially when he felt things were about to go out of control. That's why, before meeting his friends again, he decided to make a brief visit to a local healer, a wise man who lived on the town's outskirts and who, according to popular belief, could ward off evil and bring safety. Arriving at the small cabin, Gabriel was greeted by the old healer, who observed him attentively, as if knowing he was there for more than just a simple blessing. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of candles, and the scent of burning herbs lingered in the air. Without Gabriel needing to say a word, the healer began preparing a protection potion, murmuring words in an ancient language Gabriel didn't recognize. After a few minutes, the healer approached and handed him a small vial. "This will protect you," he said in a hoarse but firm voice. "But be careful, Gabriel. The evil lurking tonight is not ordinary. It's waiting for the unsuspecting. And there's something else. Something you need to know." Gabriel felt a shiver down his spine. He knew the healer wasn't one to exaggerate or believe in silly superstitions, which made his words all the more disturbing. "What do you mean by that?" "What's lurking?" he asked, trying to stay calm, but already feeling fear creeping in. The healer hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "There's a man who will cross your path tonight. He will be dressed in black and seem harmless, even friendly. But you must avoid him at all costs. He's not who you think he is. And those who accept what he offers are doomed." Gabriel frowned. "A man dressed in black? In the middle of the carnival?" "Yes," the healer responded with a grave look. "He carries great evil, and if you or your friends welcome him into your circle, nothing good will come of this night." Though Gabriel was skeptical of such warnings, he couldn't help but feel a knot of concern forming in his stomach. He thanked the healer, pocketed the protection vial, and left the cabin, his thoughts still disturbed by the old man's words. As he returned to town, the words echoed in his mind like a warning he couldn't fully ignore. When he rejoined his friends, they were already laughing and drinking as if nothing could touch the joy of that night. Gabriel tried to convince himself that the healer's warning was just another exaggerated superstition. After all, it was just a party, carnival, like every other year. But deep down, he knew something sinister was approaching. The man in black, the great evil. And that night, Gabriel would learn just how real it all was. The carnival lights now bathed the entire town, flooding the streets with vibrant colors as loud music and laughter echoed through the alleys. The air was thick with the smell of traditional food, sweet perfumes, and the smoke from bonfires scattered through the alleys, warming the revelers moving from one stage to another. Gabriel joined his friends at the meeting point, where they were already immersed in the celebratory atmosphere. Ramiro greeted him with a warm hug, visibly affected by the drinks generously circulating among the group. "You're taking too long to get into the mood, Gabriel. Come on, the night is ours," he exclaimed, handing him a bottle of rum. Fernando, more reserved, nodded, but it was clear he was also giving in to the party. For a brief moment, Gabriel almost let himself be carried away by the excitement. He had the healer's warning in mind, but seeing his friends so happy, it was hard to believe something so dark could actually happen that night. After all, it was Carnival, a time to let go of worries and give in to the contagious joy. As they walked through the streets, Gabriel observed the revelers dancing in colorful masks and exotic costumes. However, with each smile he saw, each song he heard, something felt off, as if behind the celebration, there was an invisible presence watching everything with hungry eyes. He began to wonder if it was just his mind playing tricks on him due to what the healer had said. Then something caught his attention in the crowd. Near one of the bonfires, a man in black stood motionless, observing the festivities around him with a calmness that contrasted with the chaotic celebration. He wore a hat that covered part of his face and held a glass, but he didn't seem to share the same joy as the others. On the contrary, he stood out like a shadow amidst the lights, his gaze fixed and expressionless. Gabriel's heart began to race. The healer's words echoed in his mind with a force he couldn't ignore. A man in black. He's not who you think. He didn't believe in coincidences, and as much as he wanted to dismiss the sight, his eyes seemed magnetized by that strange figure. Could it be him? Without realizing it, his steps took him closer to the man. His friends continued to dance and laugh, oblivious to Gabriel's discomfort. Ramiro, noticing Gabriel was distracted, gave him a slap on the back. "Look, Gabriel, we've got another guest." The man in black was approaching them slowly, and now his eyes were fixed on the group. He smiled, a soft smile, but with a coldness that made Gabriel's stomach churn. The stranger extended his hand and, with a low but enchantingly seductive voice, offered a bottle of wine, an offering to make the night even more memorable. Ramiro, always the impulsive one, grabbed the bottle with a wide smile. "Of course! What's Carnival without a good drink?" He opened the bottle without hesitation, pouring the dark red liquid into glasses for himself and his friends. Gabriel watched it all with a knot in his chest, unable to take his eyes off the man in black, who seemed to observe every movement with an almost predatory curiosity. When the man offered him a glass, Gabriel hesitated. The healer's words echoed once again. Those who accept what he offers are doomed. His instincts screamed not to accept, but seeing his friends already laughing and drinking, he felt pressured not to appear out of the party spirit. He took the glass, but didn't drink. "This night will be unforgettable," the man in black murmured, before stepping back into the shadows, disappearing almost as quickly as he had appeared. Gabriel remained still, holding the glass in his hands, as an inexplicable sense of fear began to overtake him. Something was definitely wrong that night, and he knew that, somehow, his fate and that of his friends had already been sealed. The loud music and laughter around him seemed to fade for Gabriel, who, though at the heart of the party, felt increasingly disconnected from what was happening around him. His friends, completely immersed in the celebration, drank and danced energetically, while he remained still, with the untouched glass in his hands. The wine seemed thicker and darker than usual, and the memory of the healer's words now consumed him completely. Ramiro, always the most exuberant of the group, began telling a joke, laughing loudly. But something about his laugh seemed wrong. It wasn't just the alcohol altering Ramiro's behavior. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible change in his posture, as if he were being pulled by an invisible force. Gabriel watched his friends with a lump in his throat. They didn't realize it, but something was changing around them. Suddenly, Fernando, who had been quiet until then, abruptly stopped and looked around with a confused expression. He blinked repeatedly as if trying to understand what was happening. "Did you guys see that?" he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "That man, he was there just now." Gabriel frowned. He had also noticed the strange presence of the man in black, but what Fernando saw seemed more disturbing. "What did you see, Fernando?" he asked in a low voice, his eyes scanning the crowd around them, searching for any sign of danger. "I don't know," Fernando replied, uneasy. "It's like he was everywhere, but at the same time, nowhere. And those shadows..." He pointed to the faint lights dancing on the building walls. The shadows cast by the bonfires seemed to move abnormally, as if they had a life of their own. Gabriel swallowed hard. The shadows, once just part of the festive scenery, now seemed to stretch, distorting into grotesque shapes. Small figures appeared to slide through the shadows, quick and almost imperceptible. The celebratory mood was slowly giving way to a sense of discomfort that grew with each passing second. "It's okay, Fernando," Ramiro said, laughing and patting his friend's shoulder. "You've just had too much to drink." He tried to dispel the tension with another joke, but Gabriel knew it wasn't just the alcohol. Fernando was seeing something the others couldn't or didn't want to see. Without warning, one of their friends, who was dancing ahead, stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. Everyone laughed, believing he had overdone the drinking, but when Gabriel approached, he noticed something strange. His friend's face was pale, and his eyes, though open, didn't move. He was breathing, but it was as if something had drained his vitality. "Hey, what's wrong with him?" Gabriel asked, kneeling to help his friend up. But as he touched him, he felt his skin cold, almost icy, as if the warmth of his body had been sucked away. Gabriel recoiled, fear growing in his chest. Ramiro and Fernando came closer, but before they could say anything, the lights around them began to flicker. The sound of the music distorted, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Gabriel looked around, and in the confusion of colors and shadows, he saw the man in black again, standing at a distance, watching with a vacant, penetrating gaze. Something was deeply wrong, and Gabriel knew that the real horror was yet to come. The air seemed to vibrate with a heavy, malevolent energy as Gabriel tried to push away the growing dread overtaking his body. He looked at his friends. Ramiro was still laughing, carefree, while Fernando watched the scene with wide eyes, clearly disturbed by what was happening. The fallen friend remained motionless, his skin cold as marble. Something was terribly wrong, but Gabriel still didn't know how to explain what he was witnessing. Before he could react, the man in black reappeared, as if emerging from the shadows themselves. He walked slowly toward the group, his steps echoing, although the sound of the music and voices around them had vanished like a lost whisper in the night. The cold smile on his face froze Gabriel inside, and the darkness around him seemed to grow denser as he approached. "What's happening here?" Gabriel asked, his voice sounding weaker than he intended. He tried to keep his composure, but fear was taking over every part of his being. "Who are you?" The man stopped in front of them, looking directly into Gabriel's eyes. There was something deeply unsettling in his gaze, an abyss of darkness that seemed to devour the soul of anyone who dared to look too long. He didn't immediately answer, just raised the bottle of wine, offering it again as if nothing was wrong. "The party is just beginning, Gabriel." "Why the rush?" Ramiro, visibly drunk, stepped forward, laughing. "Who cares about that? Come on, Gabriel, drink a little more. This wine is the best I've ever had." He tried to cheer his friend up, handing him the glass, but Gabriel continued to refuse. Fernando, on the other hand, couldn't take his eyes off the man. He was pale, trembling, as if he had just realized the extent of the danger they were facing. He's not human, Gabriel. Something's wrong." The man in black smiled once more, this time more darkly. "Ah, so you finally realized?" His voice sounded like a whisper cutting through the night's silence. "I was wondering how long it would take you to notice, but for you, unfortunately, it's too late." Gabriel took a step back, feeling an invisible pressure tighten around his chest. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to run, but his legs felt heavy, as if they were rooted to the ground. He knew instinctively that he was facing something far beyond the natural. This wasn't just a man, but an ancient entity, something that existed long before the town, long before any party or celebration. "Who? What are you?" Gabriel managed to ask, struggling against the fear tightening his throat. The man let out a low, almost humorless laugh. "You still don't understand, Gabriel." He raised one of his hands and the air around seemed to freeze. The shadows moved again, as if obeying his command. "I am what you fear on the darkest nights. I am what lurks in the corners where the light doesn't reach. I am the one you pray never to meet. And yet, here we are." Gabriel's heart pounded as the truth unfolded before his eyes. He was face to face with the devil, the very evil the healer had warned was lurking. And now he stood before them, claiming their souls, one by one. Ramiro, oblivious to what was happening, took another swig of the wine. "Ah, what nonsense is this, Gabriel? You're ruining the party." He began to laugh, but his laughter was soon interrupted by a violent cough. He doubled over, his body convulsing, and the glass fell from his hand, spilling the wine on the ground. "Ramiro!" Gabriel shouted, rushing to help him, but it was too late. Ramiro fell to his knees, his face contorted in pain. His eyes rolled back, and he let out one final breath before his body collapsed on the ground, lifeless. Ramiro's laugh echoed for the last time in Gabriel's mind, now transformed into a macabre, distorted sound. Fernando, in shock, stepped back, stumbling. This can't be happening. This isn't real." But it was real, and Gabriel knew it. The devil looked at him with a cold, triumphant smile. "The party always has its price, Gabriel. Always has a price." Gabriel's heart began to race. The healer's words echoed in his mind with a force he couldn't ignore. "A man in black. He's not who you think." He didn't believe in coincidences, and as much as he wanted to dismiss the sight, his eyes seemed magnetized by that strange figure. Could it be him? Without realizing it, his steps took him closer to the man. His friends continued to dance and laugh, oblivious to Gabriel's discomfort. Ramiro, noticing Gabriel was distracted, gave him a slap on the back. "Look, Gabriel, we've got another guest." The man in black was approaching them slowly, and now his eyes were fixed on the group. He smiled, a soft smile, but with a coldness that made Gabriel's stomach churn. The stranger extended his hand and, with a low but enchantingly seductive voice, offered a bottle of wine. and offering to make the night even more memorable. Ramiro, always the impulsive one, grabbed the bottle with a wide smile. Of course. What's Carnival without a good drink? He opened the bottle without hesitation, pouring the dark red liquid into glasses for himself and his friends. Gabriel watched it all with a knot in his chest, unable to take his eyes off the man in black, who seemed to observe every movement with an almost predatory curiosity. When the man offered him a glass, Gabriel hesitated. The healer's words echoed once again. Those who accept what he offers are doomed. His instincts screamed not to accept, but seeing his friends already laughing and drinking, he felt pressured not to appear out of the party spirit. He took the glass but didn't drink. "This night will be unforgettable," the man in black murmured before stepping back into the shadows, disappearing almost as quickly as he had appeared. Gabriel remained still, holding the glass in his hands, as an inexplicable sense of fear began to overtake him. Something was definitely wrong that night, and he knew that somehow his fate and that of his friends had already been sealed. The loud music and laughter around him seemed to fade for Gabriel, who, though at the heart of the party, felt increasingly disconnected from what was happening around him. His friends, completely immersed in the celebration, drank and danced energetically, while he remained still with the untouched glass in his hands. The wine seemed thicker and darker than usual, and the memory of the healer's words now consumed him completely. Ramiro, always the most exuberant of the group, began telling a joke, laughing loudly. But something about his laugh seemed wrong. It wasn't just the alcohol altering Ramiro's behavior. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible change in his posture, as if he were being pulled by an invisible force. Gabriel watched his friends with a lump in his throat. They didn't realize it, but something was changing around them. Suddenly, Fernando, who had been quiet until then, abruptly stopped and looked around with a confused expression. He blinked repeatedly, as if trying to understand what was happening. "Did you guys see that?" he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "That man, he was there just now." Gabriel frowned. He had also noticed the strange presence of the man in black, but what Fernando saw seemed more disturbing. "What did you see, Fernando?" he asked in a low voice, his eyes scanning the crowd around them, searching for any sign of danger. "I don't know," Fernando replied, uneasy. "It's like, he was everywhere, but at the same time nowhere, and those shadows..." He pointed to the faint lights dancing on the building walls. The shadows cast by the bonfires seemed to move abnormally, as if they had a life of their own. Gabriel swallowed hard. The shadows, once just part of the festive scenery, now seemed to stretch, distorting into grotesque shapes. Small figures appeared to slide through the shadows, quick and almost imperceptible. The celebratory mood was slowly giving way to a sense of discomfort that grew with each passing second. "It's okay, Fernando," Ramiro said, laughing and patting his friend's shoulder. "You've just had too much to drink." He tried to dispel the tension with another joke, but Gabriel knew it wasn't just the alcohol. Fernando was seeing something the others couldn't or didn't want to see. Without warning, one of their friends who was dancing ahead stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. Everyone laughed, believing he had overdone the drinking, but when Gabriel approached, he noticed something strange. His friend's face was pale, and his eyes, though open, didn't move. He was breathing, but it was as if something had drained his vitality. Ramiro's lifeless body lay at Gabriel's feet, and he realized that one by one, his friends would be taken in the same way. That wine wasn't an offer of celebration, but a death sentence. Now Fernando would be next, and eventually so would he. Gabriel tried to summon the strength to escape, but the devil was getting closer, the shadows around him moving like a current about to swallow everything in its path. Ramiro's body still lay on the ground, lifeless, as Gabriel finally felt the full weight of the situation. The laughter of the party around him seemed to fade as he stared at his friend's expressionless face. Fernando, terrified, began to walk in circles, muttering to himself that this couldn't be happening. But Gabriel knew more than ever that the healer was right. The evil had come for them. Fernando staggered away, panic clearly etched on his face. "We have to get out of here, Gabriel! We have to leave now!" he shouted, his voice trembling. But before he could take another step, something invisible pulled him back into the heart of the party. It was as if the shadows around them had a life of their own, clinging to him, holding him in place. Gabriel tried to run to him, but his feet were also heavy, rooted to the ground, as if they were being held in place. Everything around him was distorted, the music now sounding slower and grotesque, as if being played by out-of-tune instruments. The smell of the party had turned into something rotten and suffocating. The shadows danced around him, stretching and contorting like living creatures. Fernando fell to his knees, clutching his chest. His breathing was rapid and shallow, as if the air around him was being sucked away. Gabriel tried to move forward to help him, but he felt a sharp cold around his body, as if the warmth of the night had been drained. It was then that he realized the shadows, now denser and darker, were circling Fernando, like predators about to strike. "Fernando, no!" Gabriel shouted, but it was too late. The shadows completely enveloped him, and all that remained was the sound of a muffled scream, followed by a terrible silence. When the shadows dissipated, Fernando had disappeared. Nothing remained but a dark stain on the ground, as if he had never existed. Gabriel stood paralyzed, his heart pounding in his chest. He was alone now, surrounded by shadows, with the deaths of his friends still fresh in his mind. The devil had taken them, one by one, and now he was the last. The fear consuming him was unbearable, but he knew he couldn't stay there waiting for the inevitable. He quickly turned and began to run, his body moving with a strength he didn't know he still had. He ran through the winding streets of the town, which now seemed infinitely longer and darker. The colorful carnival lights were fading behind him, and all that remained were the shadows, crawling like snakes along the walls and ground, trying to reach him. As he ran, he heard distorted laughter and whispering voices that seemed to come from all directions. He remembered the healer's words, the warning about the man in black. How could he have ignored such a clear warning? Now, his friends were dead, and he knew the same fate awaited him if he couldn't escape that hellish night. The sound of footsteps behind him grew louder. He didn't need to look to know the devil was coming. Gabriel could feel the dark, cold presence approaching, like a tide of shadows. Every time he stumbled or slowed down, the footsteps grew closer, almost touching him. The desperation grew in his chest, and all he could do was run, but no matter how much he ran, there seemed to be no way out. The streets of the town, once familiar, now turned into a never-ending labyrinth. He tried to find his way back home, but the streets twisted and turned, always leading him back to the same place, the heart of the party, where the figure of the man in black still stood, waiting. Out of breath, Gabriel fell to his knees, his lungs burning. He knew he couldn't continue. He was surrounded. The devil stood in front of him, between the dying lights of the party, his face still smiling in that cold and triumphant way. "You can't escape, Gabriel," said the devil, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "The night is mine, and you're just the last." Gabriel, defeated and exhausted, looked at the ground, where the shadows slowly moved towards him. He knew the end was near. There was no way to fight it. It was inevitable. Gabriel remained on his knees on the cold, damp ground, feeling the weight of defeat pressing down on his chest. The wind around him seemed to whisper incomprehensible words, and the shadows, once timid, now advanced slowly and inevitably towards him. He knew this was the end of the line. There was nowhere else to run. No more hope of escaping the fate that had been sealed the moment he welcomed that mysterious man into the carnival. The devil, standing before him, kept his cold smile, his dark eyes watching Gabriel's every move like a hunter who had already captured his prey. "Why fight, Gabriel?" he murmured, taking another step closer. "You already know your fate. It was decided long before tonight, long before you even realized it." Gabriel, struggling to keep his sanity, tried to gather the strength he had left. His heart beat erratically, and his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, memories of his family, of his life before that cursed night. He didn't want to die. Not like this, not like his friends. But deep down, he knew he no longer had control. Fate was in other hands. He looked to the sky, perhaps hoping for some sign of redemption, some light that could take him out of this nightmare. But the sky was dark, starless, as if even the heavens had closed to him. The only presence at that moment was the cold of the night and the darkness creeping closer, like a wave about to swallow everything. The devil continued to approach, his words seeming to hypnotize Gabriel. "You fought well, for a while. But in the end, everyone gives in. Your friends are already with me, and now you will join them. There's no shame in accepting the inevitable." Gabriel felt tears welling in his eyes. He didn't want to cry, but the despair was unbearable. All he could think about was the warning he had ignored, the healer who had tried to alert him. How could he have been so foolish? If only he had listened, if only he had believed. But now, it was too late. "Please," Gabriel managed to whisper, his voice failing as the words escaped his lips. He wasn't sure who he was begging. The devil? Some higher power? Or just himself, hoping to wake up from this nightmare? But the words seemed meaningless at that moment. The devil leaned over him, his shadows wrapping around Gabriel like a mantle of darkness. The cold intensified, and Gabriel felt his body begin to weaken. His muscles were tense. The air in his lungs felt thin, and he knew the end was near. "There's nothing left to fear, Gabriel," said the devil in a soft whisper. "The night will end, and with it, everything you've known. But know this. This party will be remembered by many. You and your friends will become legends." With those words, the darkness finally enveloped him completely. Gabriel tried to fight it, but it was like fighting against a powerful tide pulling him down. His vision began to fail, and the last thing he heard was the sound of distorted laughter echoing in the distance until everything went dark. The silence of the morning after the carnival was almost supernatural. The streets, once full of life, were now empty, covered in remnants of confetti and abandoned masks. The sun had barely risen, and a light mist hung over the town, as if the previous night had left something inexplicable in the air. There was no more music, No more laughter. All that remained was a distant echo, like a vague memory of something that could never be fully understood. The narrator, sitting in front of a dusty window, looked out at the deserted streets as he recounted the story of his grandfather, Gabriel Torres, with a melancholic gaze. It was a story passed down from generation to generation in his family, always told in a low voice, almost like a whisper, so the wind wouldn't carry it to the wrong ears. "My grandfather never returned from the carnival that night," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. "No one knows for sure what happened to him and his friends. All we know is that one by one they disappeared without a trace. Some say it was a curse, others believe there was some kind of accident. But the older folks in town, those who still remember, talk about something different." He paused for a moment, as if pondering his next words. Outside, the town's silence was almost oppressive, but the narrator continued. "They talk about a man in black, someone who appeared in town that night, walking among the shadows. They say he offered drinks to the men who joined him at the party, not knowing they were sealing their fates." The town was never the same after that night. Carnival celebrations continued, but always with a shadow of tragedy hanging over them. Many families lost someone that night, and those who survived swore they would never attend the festivities again. The devil had walked among them, and his trail was still etched in the memories of the elders. The narrator looked at his trembling hands, holding a small photograph of Gabriel Torres. "My grandfather was a good man, respected, loved by his family. But that night, he made the mistake of ignoring a healer's warning, and that mistake cost him his life and his soul." The town, now aged and worn by time, bore invisible scars from that fateful night. The narrator sighed, realizing that the questions that had always haunted him, what really happened to Gabriel and his friends, would never have a clear answer. But there was one thing he was sure of. The evil that walked the streets that night still lingered in the town, lurking in the shadows. "Some say that every year, on the same day, he returns," the narrator continued, his voice lower, almost as if sharing a secret. "During the carnival, when the music starts and people get lost in the joy, there are those who swear they see a man in black, standing at a distance, watching. He never speaks, never comes closer, but everyone who sees him knows he's waiting for something." The story had become more than just a family memory. It was a living legend, a tale told to scare children and keep adults on guard. No one knew for sure if the devil really walked among them, but no one was willing to find out. And so, every carnival, there was always a shadow, a silent presence that hovered over the town, reminding everyone that there are things that should not be ignored. Carnival was never the same after that night, the narrator concluded, his eyes fixed on the misty horizon. And deep down, we all know the devil might return. The question is, who will be the next to accept his offer? With those words, the narrator let the silence fill the space between the story and reality. Outside, the town remained asleep, but the presence of the past still lingered, like a warning to those who dared to ignore the carnival's secrets.